It is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer on a Friday. We've got a 2 podcast week here for you. We had to hop on to talk about some Kyle Van Noy re-signing with the Ravens news. We're going to get to that in a bit. We also are going to talk to the 33rd team's Dan Pizzuta to talk about the wide receivers in this year's draft class. Last week, we did the offensive linemen. If you want to go back and listen to that, I would highly suggest it. We got wide receivers. We're going to cover defense at some point soon. But Jonas, the biggest, most impactful part of the Ravens bringing back Kyle Van Noy is that our free agency bracket runner-up has now re-signed with the Ravens, which means that one of our final four teams is back, and I think we deserve some credit for this.
We should have. Should we have had a pool? Should we have made this a March Madness pool? Because
Yeah.
I think we'd be in the money right about now.
We would. And the Final Four is happening this weekend too, so it all works out. And the only question is, could my 1 seed in the offensive line region in Greg Van Roten sign with the Ravens? That's all I'm banking on, Jonas.
I think this is that the Ravens have reached a carrying capacity of 1 van on their team. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
If you recall, our Final Four had 3 vans in there, which was just far too many vans. More fans in the parking lot at Woodstock is the joke that I made, or the Spencers at the mall. Jonas, let's talk about Kyle Van Noy coming back to the Ravens on a 2-year, $9 million deal that could be up to $10 million if he reaches certain incentives. Were you surprised, first and foremost, that this was a 2-year deal and not a 1-year deal, which is what Van Noy signed last year when the Ravens picked him up essentially off the couch in September?
Yeah, a little bit, just because you look at his recent contract history. It's just been a lot of 1-year stops. I think before he got to Baltimore, I think, or including Baltimore, it was maybe 3 teams in 3 years or 4 years and 4 teams. So for the Ravens to give him a 2-year deal, a little surprising. But again, don't overreact to the big headline of this being 2 years, 9 million, 2 years, 10 million, because we don't know what the structure of this deal is, and that's going to tell us a lot about just how easy it is to get out from underneath it if the Ravens need to. Just like with Derrick Henry, that was what, a 2-year, $14 million deal, 2-year, $16 million deal for something like that. But
16, yeah.
in actuality, the Ravens have a pretty easy way of getting out of that and making that pretty manageable. So don't overreact if you're not in love with the signing. Personally, I think it's good value, just like pretty much every other deal that Eric DeCosta has handed out this year. The only real deal that I think you can say that he kind of paid market value for was Justin Madubuike, and even that was defensible because he got out ahead of Christian Wilkins getting his deal on the open market. So I think another tip of the hat to Eric DeCosta for getting this deal done. There wasn't a whole lot of talent out there on that edge rusher market. I think Emmanuel Ogbah was the only guy on the NFL.com's top 101 free agents still available. And obviously he would have counted against the compensatory pick formula. So for the Ravens to get a guy who was, top 30 in pass rush win rate last year on PFF, who's coming off a career high in sacks, who was able to rush from the outside, from the inside, obviously be a veteran presence in that locker room that's looking pretty green right now, in the same way that Odell and Nelson Aguilar wore the elder statesman of that wide receiver room last year. I don't think there's a plausible way that you could be upset about this deal. And I think it's good business, and it's definitely striking at a position of need.
The Ravens hit on so many of these 1-year deal guys last offseason. Jadeveon Clowney was obviously another big one. Kyle Van Noy in the defensive secondary. You had Arthur Mollett was one of those guys, Ronald Darby. And the tough part for Eric DeCosta is determining which of those guys, which of their success is going to be repeatable. And for Kyle Van Noy, it is certainly a gamble because he's 33 years old and had 9 sacks last year, but that was a career high in 14 games. And yes, he's playing in the same style defense, but with a different defensive coordinator now, no longer Mike McDonald there. And he's going to have maybe a little bit less talent around him. Is he going to be able to repeat that kind of production? Probably won't get 9 sacks again, but they are betting that he is not going to fall off a cliff. And they're doing the same thing with Arthur Mollett by bringing him back on a 2-year deal. Just looking at the reported numbers before we know the specifics about the guaranteed money, about the potential out after this year, Kyle Van Noy signed for a deal of the same length, but for about half as much money as Jadeveon Clowney signed. 2 years, $20 million for Clowney in Carolina. So Van Noy was obviously the cheaper option, which made a lot of sense because Van Noy's older. He has less of a track record of success. But this move was about raising the floor of the pass rush. And now you have Odafe Owe, Justin Madubuike, Michael Pierce, David Ojabo, Kyle Van Noy, Travis Jones, Brent Urban along that defensive line. You have Roquan Smith, who can blitz from the linebacker spot, Trenton Simpson, who can do the same. Do the Ravens have enough? And for a team that led the NFL with 60 sacks last year, how much could this group produce in 2024, Jonas?
Well, I wanna look upward to our neighbors across the Mason-Dixon line. The Eagles last year they brought pretty much everyone back from that pass rush group, I think, aside from Javon Hargrave, and that was a group that the year before was just out of this world good in sack protection,
Broke the
unsustainably
record
so.
for,
I think.
for sacks.
Yeah. So, even if the Ravens had found a way to bring back Clowney, get, Ajabo healthy, get Owe to take a next step, get Madubuike to be as consistent, there was no guarantee that the Ravens were coming anywhere close to 60 sacks. Think of just how many situations the Ravens found themselves in last year that were conducive to getting sacks. It was a lot of third and longs. It was a lot of obvious passing situations because the Ravens were blowing teams out. It was Mike McDonald throwing, splitters and curveballs and junk pitches that these other coordinators just had not seen or these quarterbacks had not seen. None of that would have been sustainable into 2024 because so much of that was just, this once in a blue moon type team. I think this is something that we can probably talk about after the draft, but like how many positions on the team right now could you say are definitively better than they were at the end of last season? Like there's not really
Running
many,
back,
if at
maybe.
all.
Yeah.
Maybe running back. You could say that like, Lamar could get better, just, on a kind of game to game basis. I know
Yeah, but
obviously
the
it's
depth
tough to
behind him is not as good. So quarterback probably worse.
maybe safety if you say like, you're banking on a full season of Marcus Williams, but then again, you're losing that third safety versatility
Yeah.
with Geno Stone gone. So even though pass rush is this glamorous position and deservedly so, you look at how much these guys are getting paid, especially the folks at the top of the market, and it makes sense to concentrate on it. But going into this draft, the draft is the lifeblood of the team. Like, it's such a cliche and obvious thing to say, but it's true because just look around this team, look at this depth chart and ask yourself, where are the Ravens actually better? And it's pretty grim because I don't know if there's anywhere that you could say that they are definitively better than they were last
Yeah.
year.
Yeah. I still think the Ravens will invest some draft capital in the pass rush. Probably not a day one pick. I still think they go with offensive line, but maybe a day two pick in the second or third round. You talk about positions that have taken a step back. We've talked about the wide receiver position a little bit on this podcast, and we're going to dive deep into it today as well. Why the Ravens could be targeting a wide receiver early in the draft, which takes place in less than 3 weeks. They have Zay Flowers, obviously coming back, coming off a very nice rookie season. They have Rashad Bateman entering the last year of his contract, essentially. They are relying on Nelson Aguilar to be the veteran in that room. Outside of those three guys, they could probably use just a little bit more. They could use some depth. They could use another high upside piece, considering, it's just Zay Flowers in that room after this year, most likely. So let's dive into the potential picks for the Ravens. I think Marvin Harrison Jr., Ohio State and St. Joe's Prep's own Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be out of their range. Malik Neighbors from LSU is going to be out of their range. Rome Odunze, who I mentioned months ago, everybody else hopped on the Rome Odunze train, and he has now flown up draft boards. And out of Washington, he is probably going to be a top 10 pick. And then one other guy who might be in the middle of the first round, who I just don't see falling to 30, is Brian Thomas Jr., another LSU wide receiver. So that leaves 4 or 5 guys that could be in range for the Ravens with the number 30 overall pick in a draft that is incredibly deep in wide receiver, just as deep in wide receiver as it is in offensive line. That aligns nicely with the Ravens' needs. But the 5 guys that we're going to talk about today here, Jonas, AD Mitchell out of Texas, Keon Coleman out of Florida State, Xavier Worthy out of Texas, Lad McConkey out of Georgia, and Troy Franklin out of Oregon. And Jonas, last week we did food comps because offensive linemen like to eat. You came up with the idea of doing an Orioles prospect comps for these wide receivers.
Yeah, you let me cook last week, or I think it was Tuesday, right? It
Tuesday,
wasn't even
earlier
last
this
week.
week.
Yeah, yeah,
What's
yeah.
the content we're
So,
delivering our listeners?
uh, am I going to let you go take at bats? Is this BP for
There we
you?
go. Yeah.
I don't know what the analog is.
Yeah. I mean, you did mention splitters and curveballs being thrown by Mike McDonald. So it was a nice,
Yeah,
foreshadowing to this. But I'm going to
our
make some
our listeners are
comps.
going to be shocked when they realize I'm not a baseball fan.
Yeah, that's tough. But I am. And I also do another podcast called the Banner Baseball Show at least once a week on the Banner, the BaltimoreBanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months. But it's a great show. All right, let's talk about AD Mitchell out of Texas. This, to me, is a guy that I would like to compare to Heston Kjerstad because Heston Kjerstad is going to mash homers. He's got incredible raw power, but he needs to refine some areas of his game, like defense, like cutting down on whiffs. Kjerstad, by the way, has 5 homers in his first 6 games in AAA Norfolk, which is utterly ridiculous. AD Mitchell has a lot of great tools. 6'2", 205. He's got ideal size. He's got very solid speed. He had 55 catches for 845 yards last year and 11 touchdowns in 14 games. He played his first 2 years at Georgia before transferring over, so he won a couple national championships. The question is, can he put it all together? Can he marry all of his incredible skills? He's not a route running technician like Jerry Jeudy or Devontae Smith were coming out of college. And the other questioning, this is not for Heston Kjerstad. This is where the comparison leaves something to be desired, because I think Heston Kjerstad is a very engaged player who works very hard. The question for AD Mitchell is, how engaged is he when he is not getting the ball? Is he able to stay focused, and is he a good enough blocker on the outside, good enough run blocker when he's not just getting the ball thrown his way? And AD Mitchell might be a risky type pick simply because we don't know exactly how interested he is and how much extra work he's going to put into the areas of his game that he needs to.
Only number that I would throw your way in the way of the AD Mitchell talk is his yards per route run, which we've talked about is a pretty good metric for measuring productivity given the opportunities that you're actually afforded. In college, 1.68, which is just out of this world bad for a first round prospect. And he played at Georgia with a pretty good quarterback in Stetson Mitchell. He went to Texas playing with Quinn
Stetson
Ewers,
Bennett.
Stetson Bennett. Went to Texas and playing with a, gifted if inconsistent quarterback in Quinn Ewers, playing, alongside Xavier Worthy and a lot of other good weapons on that Texas offense. So, maybe you're saying possibly there were just guys draining targets from him. Maybe he was running good routes and just not getting the ball. But for him to be this athletic, this talented, this freakish in his athleticism, and only average 1.68, anything under 2 is pretty worrisome for a wide receiver prospect. So
Yeah.
you are doing a whole lot of projection with a guy like AD Mitchell that he's going to be a number 1, number 2 level prospect or just player in the NFL, full stop.
His highlight reel is fun to watch, and you could see a lot of those skills, but it's on a game in and game out basis that you really start to get concerned when you're watching AD Mitchell. Another Texas wide receiver that you mentioned is Xavier Worthy. My comp for him is Enrique Bradfield Jr., who you may know as the Orioles' first round pick from last July's draft. And the reason that I compare him to Bradfield is because Enrique Bradfield Jr. stole 130 bases in 3 years at Vanderbilt and has an 80 grade speed. That's the kind of speed we're talking about when we talk about Xavier Worthy. 6'1", 160. So he is a small guy. He is not very physical. He is going to have to rely on beating guys off the line of scrimmage and being thrown a lot of deep balls. And he was very successful at Texas in doing that. 75 catches for over 1,000 yards, had 5 touchdowns, broke the combine record for the fastest 40 time, 4.21. But Jonas, he is skinny and he doesn't play any bigger than his size. You know, some guys like Devontae Smith are skinny, but they're wiry strong. I'm not sure that Xavier Worthy fits that category. And when you're talking about what the Ravens might need, separation is obviously key for any wide receiver, but that also takes a little bit of play strength. It's not just your ability to run past guys, it's your ability to push guys off in legal ways and get open. And I'm not positive that Xavier Worthy has that in his bag at this point.
Yeah, I'm not out on speed when it comes to drafting Ravens prospects, but when you think of the tortured history of the Ravens drafting wide receivers in the first round, Brashad Perriman, speed demon, couldn't stay healthy, yes, but also couldn't really get open. Marquise Brown, also bedeviled by injuries, but again, never really lived up to that run away from you potential that you saw on tape at Oklahoma. Rashad Bateman, I think has been he was a more progressive pick in the sense that he didn't need to be a burner, even though he did a 4.4 speed to separate from guys. And we've seen when he's healthy, him, that ability to kind of change gears, change direction, work to his advantage, even if the production hasn't been there. And then Zay Flowers, I think people forget that he was only like a low 4.4s guy. He wasn't, despite his smaller stature, a burner in the Xavier Worthy sense. And he's been more of a guy who wins with his feet, who wins with his change of direction. And again, you saw that finally bear out in his production. So not to say that, the bust potential for Xavier Worthy is especially high because of that speed. He was a terrific performer at Texas. If you just look at his year-to-year production from the moment he stepped foot in Texas, he was, I think a 700+ yard guy every season. But I think for the Ravens, considering what their needs are and who might be on the board at number 30, it's not worth the squeeze to me.
Nice pun. And you also think about guys that have consistently run near the top of the combine in 40-yard times, and those guys don't always do well. It is just that. It is just how fast you can do this one drill. It is not play speed. It is not anything other than 40 yards down the field wearing no pads against no defense. It really is not a skill that necessarily translates. It ends up being not a great indicator for skill. Now it'll give you an idea of just, how fast a top end speed this guy has. However, it may not translate. One guy that I like a whole lot in this draft, Jonas, Keon Coleman from Florida State, who played his first 2 years at Michigan State. This is the opposite of Xavier Worthy. This is a big dude. He is 6'4", 210, and he plays very big. He has a incredible catch radius. He goes up and gets the ball. You think of guys like Drake London, Allen Robinson, guys that you can just lob the ball up to and he'll make a catch on. Was playing also with quarterback Jordan Travis at Florida State, who I like for the Ravens. We'll talk about him on a later podcast. Nice mid-round pick maybe as a backup quarterback for Lamar Jackson. My comparison for Keon Coleman is going to be Kobe Mayo, who is strong as an ox, who is a big third baseman. Now, does he need to improve some areas of his game, like defense over at third base? Perhaps. And, is there a little bit of swing and miss in his game? Sure. However, it's hard to watch him play and hit long, long homers and think that this guy is not going to succeed in Major League Baseball. And by the same token, I watched Keon Coleman make unbelievable catches at Florida State. One of them was a one-handed leaping catch over the middle of the field against Syracuse, which was in a game where he had 9 catches for 140 yards and a touchdown. to break the hearts of my Syracuse Orange. It's hard to watch those highlights and think this guy is not going to succeed in the NFL.
But I love the idea of you going to the Orioles dugout or maybe the Norfolk Tides dugout and like telling Kobe about this podcast, and then like him listening to this podcast and him going home and crushing Keon Coleman tape and just doing the Leo DiCaprio.
Yeah, pointing at the screen.
But
I mean, Kobe Mayo's
yeah,
from Florida as well.
right there you go. A lot of good talent from Florida. I think I was going to talk about this later, but I think we can talk about it now. Just like the idea of what Derrick Henry might mean for someone like Keon Coleman. You know, you bring in Derrick Henry, and the hope is that he makes life easier for Lamar Jackson by inviting these heavy boxes. You know, are these opposing defenses going to drop that safety into the box because they fear a Derrick Henry handoff? They fear a Lamar Jackson, read option keeper. And if so, if you're the Ravens and you're anticipating that, boy, it sure would be nice to have a ball winner at that X receiver position. Do you know, Paul? And it's not in the notes, so you can take a look and not figure it out anyway. How many throws to outside receivers on back shoulder fades Lamar Jackson has attempted over his entire career, according to Sports Info Solution?
Oh, geez. I don't know. 180?
No, Paul. No. I'm
How
talking
many?
like just the okay. It's not 100. It's not 80 because Joe Burrow, who was having these terrific physical receivers, and T Higgins and Jamar Chase is not attempting more than like 10 or 15 a year. But
Okay,
Lamar, again, according to SIS, back shoulder fades, outside receivers, and I'm specifying outside receivers because we've seen him throw those slot fades to like, Nelson Aguilar and Zay
yeah,
Flowers and Rashad Bateman and have it be really nice. But that gives you a little bit more space. You want that guy
sure.
to go up and be a 50-50 ball winner, a contested catch dog. Lamar has attempted one back shoulder fade to an outside receiver
100
since
is
2019.
what you meant.
One, and it was to Odell last year against the Cardinals, and it was incomplete. So
Wow.
you're saying like, you know, I don't want to. If I'm Eric DeCosta, I don't want to overinvest and like reach for a Keon Coleman because, again, like we mentioned, there's a possibility that Derrick Henry is only here for 1 year in Baltimore, and
Yeah,
maybe that's a year where Keon Coleman needs a long windup to actually get good and be a, guy who can throw these 50-50 balls and have them turn them into 80-20 balls. But I think that is something that is interesting to look out for. Is like, do the Ravens take a swing on an X receiver because you are going to have all that space where it's just one deep safety, single high. You don't have to worry about them kind of coming over and disrupting stuff on these, passes that Lamar has not thrown. We think can throw, probably not his greatest strength right now, but I'm
right.
just kind of fascinated by that facet of what Derrick Henry's addition to this offense means for what the Ravens might look for in a wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to strike an interesting balance here because you have those fast guys in Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman. I just would like to see one of those receivers play with Lamar Jackson. I just want to see what it looks like. The question is it worth a first round pick? Because I think Keon Coleman is going to be probably an early second round pick at the latest. Is it worth taking that type of risk for a guy who you have some concerns about maybe his separation? I think that type of receiver might flourish with Lamar. It will often come down to how much does Lamar trust this guy. If Lamar is seeing that he's blanketed in coverage, is he still willing to throw the ball up and just trust that his 6'4" guy is going to go and get it? And it sometimes quarterbacks don't trust their wide receivers to do that, and it probably depends on who the wide receiver is and how much history they have together. But you would like to see a pairing like that just because you can think of the possibilities of looking back to the AFC Championship game against the Chiefs. Maybe if you have somebody like that on the outside and you have Rashad Bateman on the other side, maybe, Lamar is more willing to throw the ball up like he did for Isaiah Likely in the end zone, which was an ill-fated throw. But, maybe it works out if you have somebody like Keon Coleman. So I'd like to see it, and that's why I probably have him at the top of my board in terms of who might be available for the Ravens, but I understand the concerns about separation. All right, other guys that might be considered here. Ladd McConkey had a few injuries last season, so his stats aren't as gaudy as some of the other guys in this category. He missed some games with back and ankle injuries, 30 catches for fewer than 500 yards, 2 touchdowns in 9 games. From everything that scouts say, he is an excellent route runner. He's a redshirt junior. He's 6'1", 186, so not huge. He's does drop some deep balls, which is a concern as well. But he doesn't have the eye-popping tools that Xavier Worthy or Keon Coleman or Adonai Mitchell have. And that's why I'm comparing him to an Orioles, no longer a prospect technically, but a recent prospect, Jordan Westberg. Westberg did not have the power that Heston Kjerstad had, and that's why Kjerstad went second overall and Westberg went 30th overall in that 2020 draft. He does not have the defense that Joey Ortiz had, who was a 4th-round pick in the 2019 draft. However, he marries all of his skills very nicely, and he does the little things right, which is what I feel Ladd McConkey did at Georgia.
And he's still got some juice. I know he doesn't have, Keon Coleman's size or Xavier Worthy's speed, but he's a 4.39 guy at 186 pounds. That's awfully impressive. The NFL.com prospect page has his athleticism score as a 90 out of 99 or 100. So that's good. I think he would be a consideration for me at number 30 if I'm the Ravens. I do wonder and worry a little bit about his medicals. He's dealt with I think ankle injuries and back injuries, which
Yeah.
both of those give you a little bit of pause. There's obviously the connection that we haven't mentioned to Todd Monken. I think he did a recent hit on Glad did a hit on I think Kay Adams' show, and mentioned that Todd Monken was great for him. He really knows how to put receivers in a position to succeed. And Ladd is a guy who can drop in anywhere. I think he's a lot like Rashad. I think he's a lot like Zay, where you can set him off as that X and ask him to go win downfield. You can put him in motion. You can have him be on the strong side of the field and work that way. He's going to be valued and treasured because of that versatility and because he has that route running polish that is pretty unique after that top trio of receivers. So it would not surprise me, nor would it disappoint me if the Ravens were to take Ladd at number 30. But it wouldn't also surprise me to see him maybe slip into like the late 30s, maybe the mid 40s, and perhaps that puts him in a range where the Ravens say, you know what, we're comfortable that with our number of draft picks, we don't mind spending one to move up 20 spots or so and go get this guy.
Right. And last but not least, Troy Franklin from Oregon. The opposite of McConkey in that he has gaudy numbers. 1,383 yards, 81 catches last year, 14 touchdowns in 13 games. For the same reason that scouts are hesitant to move Bo Nix up draft boards simply because of his numbers, I think fans should be equally hesitant to move Troy Franklin up simply because his numbers are that much better than everybody else. That Oregon offense just produces insane numbers and will always make wide receivers look good. And you do see occasionally some good wide receivers come out of Oregon, but you often see a lot of misses because they put up ridiculous stats. I'm not as high on Troy Franklin. Same with Ladd McConkey. I don't think that either of those guys would be a terrific pick at 30th overall. However, if the Ravens trade back or if they trade up in the second round, maybe McConkey or Franklin make more sense. But Franklin, in terms of a Orioles prospect comp, I was going back and forth between Dylan Beavers, who probably doesn't hit it for as much power as he should, which is similar to Troy Franklin, who probably should catch a few more deep balls considering his speed, but was not quite as good in that area. I think Beavers hits for a guy who hit an insane number of home runs at Cal. Coming out, I thought that was going to be his calling card, and it hasn't been yet. He hit only 11 homers in the minors last year. And another guy is Connor Norby, who I think is very useful. However, I don't know how useful he is to the Orioles. And in a same way, I think Troy Franklin is going to be a useful NFL player. I don't know how useful he would be for the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Dylan Beavers or
Or Connor Norby. Yeah, this is some
or
sicko
Connor.
level of Orioles prospect rankings here.
Yeah, but I think the Troy Franklin first round buzz has quieted, if not just completely fallen off the radar. He's
Yeah.
Not an overwhelming athlete, and a lot of his production was premised on screens and just kind of quick hitters and that Oregon offense, which obviously, kind of accounted for Bo Nix's absurd completion percentage.
Right.
Just taking a lot of layups. So I think there's a lot of projection when it comes to Troy Franklin and imagining what he could be at that next level, because there's just not there's not as much evidence of him running the kinds of routes or doing the kind of things that you would need to feel good about taking him at number 30 overall.
So those are the guys that we think would make sense for the Ravens at number 30 overall. And there are plenty of other guys in the second, third rounds that might make sense as well. And to catch up and get a deeper dive into all of these guys that we mentioned, and even some that we haven't, we caught up with a man of the 33rd team who is going to talk with us, Dan Pizzuta, about the all of these wide receiver prospects. And let's throw it back to that interview right now.
Made this a March Madness pool.
Well, that's not it, Jonas, but I will find it at some point. we will have this interview for you coming up very soon. Jonas, what else can you tell us?
Is this where I vamp?
This is where you vamp for a few minutes while I look this up.
Should I talk about the Ravens or other stuff as well?
Talk about the Ravens, I think, is what you have to do.
Oh, man. I really wanted to talk about Shogun. Okay, fine. I'll talk about the Ravens. What's going on with the Ravens? We've got the Liars Luncheon coming up on Tuesday. That is the annual pre-draft presser with Eric DeCosta, John Harbaugh, no Joe Ortiz, because Joe Ortiz no longer works for the Ravens. But that's where we ask them about prospects, about the Ravens draft plans, and they lie to us because what incentive do they have for telling us the truth? And then we all go back and try to make sense of what exactly they told us with very little success. Like the time that they said that that the kind of center prospect that they like in the draft in the weeks before they drafted Tyler Linderbaum was big, strong, and powerful, and then they took a guy who weighs less than 300 pounds.
Wow. Did that happen?
I think so. It was either that or at the combine.
Okay. Well, during that time during which you vamped, and by the way, hopefully everybody is watching along on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter to our debacle here. You can give us a review, give us a thumbs up, give us all that good love while I toss to our Dan Pizzuta interview, which hopefully will work. Let's see. Whenever you're ready, Jonas.
We are delighted to have for our second draft installment focus on wide receivers today, Dan Pizzuta, an NFL analyst for the 33rd team, formerly worked with Sharp Football Analysis, Football Outsiders Almanac, doing great work at the 33rd team, which with Derek Klassen, Greg Cosell, a lot of great stuff being pumped out, especially around draft time. Last week, Dan had an article on the golden age of wide receiver prospects. This is a good class to need a wide receiver. The Ravens definitely need a wide receiver. Dan, thanks for joining us. I guess to kind of start things off before we talk about who might be a fit for the Ravens at 30, maybe 64, somewhere day one, day two. This is kind of a spot for the Ravens where they continually find themselves needing a wide receiver linked to wide receivers in the first round. Zay Flowers coming off a pretty successful rookie year. Rashad Bateman coming back after a mixed third year, parting ways with Odell Beckham Jr., bringing back Nelson Aguilar. Again, it's not a great room, but there is, good pedigree there at least. What do you kind of make about this Ravens wide receiver room? And, do you feel like Zay is a number one? Do you feel like Rashad was maybe, kind of disappointing last year despite him getting open on tape? I mean, what do you kind of think of when you have in your mind's eye what this Ravens wide receiver room could look like for 2024?
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where since there is a lot of pedigree and there always has been like a lot to like about those guys that are in that receiver room. I was a fan of Rashad Bateman coming out, and he's just kind of one of those guys that you always are hoping there's just a little bit more from. So having kind of that up and down year last year is a little disappointing, but you always kind of do see a lot of those traits that you think can continue to build on. You look at Zay Flowers, and he was a lot of fun when he was on the field last year. He was a guy that you kind of had to really trust his traits when you were looking at what he did in Boston College last year, because that offense it was so bad. He was just getting overthrown just all the time, but he was getting open. So I think there's certain things like from both of those guys that you'll like and probably continue to improve upon as they have the second year in this offense. But yeah, you can never have too many wide receivers, and I would not say the Ravens have that problem right now. So adding to that, no matter what their situation would be, would probably be a good idea.
Yeah, and I feel
Yeah,
like scouts. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jonas.
just along those lines, Dan. This is a room that last year when they were, I think this is an offense last year that when they had Mark Andrews healthy, when they had Isaiah Likely healthy, when they were playing together, 12 personnel worked really well for them, even though they were primarily a 3-wide, kind of spread them out team. Is the importance of wide receiver to this Ravens receiving attack overstated because you have that nice foundation with Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely? I mean, do you see this offense, regardless of maybe what this team does in the draft, kind of shifting more to that 2 tight end formations of old, or do you think it's more in Todd Monken's wheelhouse to kind of keep things 11 personnel, more speed in the field, more horizontal stretch on the field?
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of both there, and I think that is going to be one of the things that makes this Ravens offense kind of to work in the way it can be versatile, where you do have the two tight ends with Andrews and Likely. You do have when you have Patrick Ricard, who was supposed to be an offensive lineman, but kind of ended up being like a kind of de facto lineman, but still playing the tight end and still getting on the field like a
Everything. Yeah.
significant amount of time when he was kind of supposed to be phased out. If we kind of went on what they were saying during training camp last year, so he's always going to be a guy that moves around a little bit. What you are still for a team that is going to be heavy in 12 or 21, you're still over 50% of the time, even for like the lowest teams in the league. I think only if you're like the Shanahan 49ers are you like really below 50% in 11 personnel. So
Right.
it's still going to be a personnel grouping that's out on the field most of the time. So you would like to have a pretty solid 3 wide receivers if you can, and not every team can, but I think that would not. Having some of those bigger bodies and some of those bigger personnel groupings does not make wide receiver less important, because it's still going to be out on the field quite a bit.
And in terms of what kind of wide receiver the Ravens should be looking for, we had a conversation earlier in the pod about it. I feel like scouts talk about flavors of prospects. It's just depending on, a lot of guys are rated equally, and it's just which kind would you prefer? You've got Zay, who is so shifty. You've got Rashad Bateman, who can get open down the field. Obviously, you have the tight ends in the middle of the field, and Nelson Aguilar as a veteran wide receiver in that group. What kind of wide receiver, what prototype would you be looking for if you're looking to add to that room?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, especially for the Ravens, and I think just in general, I think just getting open is probably the skill that I like to see for receivers the most, because that's on the receiver, right? You can use speed, and some of these like bigger body guys, it can kind of not quite translate as much, and some of those, if you're really great at contested catches, why are you in so many contested catch situations? That can be a thing that kind of goes more to the wide receiver's skill of like not really having the great skill that's going to translate outside of getting open is just a thing that usually does translate pretty well. So I think the Ravens have been smart in when they do target those kind of guys, like Bateman is that kind of guy. Flowers was that kind of guy. So I wouldn't be surprised if they still kind of target a guy whose, main skill or something that they can see translate is getting open. So I think that's where they go. And especially for a team like the Ravens and with a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, where you're not necessarily going to always be using some of that quick game or need someone to be kind of like a check down type of player, because Lamar's legs are the check down. So you kind of don't always need someone to be like spamming that short area of the field, especially because you have a Mark Andrews or Isaiah Likely if you're going to be in 12 personnel a lot. So you kind of have that area of the field covered. So if you have a guy who can work that kind of intermediate area and has shown the ability to get open in there, like I think that's always going to be the type of guy the Ravens are looking at.
First of all, I want to take a moment to applaud the universe for that just wonderful bit of dramatic irony with the sirens coming over Dan's feed there as we talk about what the Ravens need a wide receiver. Just could not have scripted that any better. So thanks everyone. You really did your part. Dan, I have a take that I'm kind of workshopping. There's a lot of interests in Ravens world in AD Mitchell. He fits. I think he profiles like a Raven in that he is a wide receiver and he is fast and he looks really, really good on his highlights. My thing is, I don't think he actually plays like a Raven by the kind of hokey cliches of what we think playing like a Raven means. He, at least at Texas, did not run all of his routes at full speed. Some of that might have been just kind of a function of playing in that system with maybe some half field reads where he felt like he could take the play off. Also not a good blocker despite his size. Are you kind of in step with me? Do you feel like what he is as a prospect in the intangible department does not really mesh with the kind of stated goals and values and I guess morals of like a Ravens first round pick, especially as someone at that wide receiver spot?
Yeah, it's interesting, especially in the sense of kind of where the Ravens are picking, because I like dive into these prospects every year and kind of do a big piece on it, which I did mention that came out either this week or last week. I don't know. Time kind of stands still around draft season. I have no idea when things came out, but one of the things looking at like this wide receiver class as a whole really does stand out and like lives up to the hype. The weird thing is the guys who are projected to go in that back half of the first round are the guys I'm kind of iffiest about. And I think Mitchell is one of those guys. You kind of look at what he has with that speed and, like you said, it is there. But the refined things about being a wide receiver are things that don't always show up. And I think like when you kind of see prospects that can like potentially fail, it kind of is some of those speed guys who don't actually have the receiver things down on a consistent basis, and kind of like speed is cool. I think among like positions, the wide receiver is the one I like really care the least about actual like raw speed, because it just doesn't really matter if you can't get open, if you're not using that in a good and consistent way. And I think we've seen plenty of really fast wide receivers who just haven't been able to translate that into an actual good skill. And you guys have like Keenan Allen, who's been in the league for over 10 years and ran like a 4.7. So there's so much to translate there. So when I kind of look at these wide receivers, I've put together a metric for a really long time now, but I kind of look at what these receivers added to their offense, because college offenses are weird, right? There's so many different flavors of college offenses. So you kind of have to contextualize like what these guys are doing. Like having 15 yards per target in one of like the most wide open pass heavy, offenses is going to be much different than even there can be guys who were doing like 11 yards per target in a much like worse the offense, and the degree of difficulty is much higher. So I take a look at what these guys average on a yards per target basis, and then what the quarterback and the passing game averaged on throws to anyone else in the offense. And then you kind of subtract that and you see how many, kind of yards per play the receiver added. And the Mitchell comes out negative, which is kind of one of the biggest red flags for guys who for prospects. When I look at this, there hasn't really been a lot of guys who were drafted in the first round who came out as negative. I think the two are recently were Chris Olave and Jerry Jeudy, and those two guys. Olave was a thing where he didn't have a lot of yards after the catch, and he was playing with two great wide receivers in his offense. Ended up being the crazy JSN year where he was insane, and then Garrett Wilson. So there was a little bit there, and Jerry Jeudy was also playing with really good guys. And I think whatever you think of Jerry Jeudy, I wasn't very high on him. I'm still really not. So it's interesting. There have been like a couple of like moderate successes for guys that were come out negative here, but it's not very good. And so the Mitchell comes out there, Keon Coleman comes out there. So when you're like not adding something to your college offense, it raises a lot of questions of like what you're actually going to do, in your NFL offense, because things are only going to get harder from there. So Mitchell's one of those guys where you just kind of look at his profile and you just kind of really have to, if you're drafting him, if you are a team, you really have to be confident that you can put him in a position where some of that speed is going to translate, some of that effort is going to be there on a down to down basis. And if not, like I think there's guys who are going to go in like the second or third round that I'll be a little more comfortable kind of with their profile than I am some of those guys that are projected to go in like the back part of the first.
And Dan, you mentioned Keon Coleman, a guy that I like, though, he is exactly how you described a prospect that you might want to stay away from, which is doesn't get very open, but also can make insanely contested catches. And it leads you to ask, okay, why does he have to make all these contested catches? Is he not getting enough separation? But we've seen also like teams fall in love with guys like this, like Drake London. I remember was a guy that I felt I was very worried about coming out, because I was like, why does he have to make all these contested catches? Where do you think Keon Coleman falls in that kind of range of above the rim guys?
Yeah, so I think if you like really looked at Drake London, like he was a better separator than I think he got a lot of credit for, and that was kind of the offense he was into, because
Right.
before the Caleb Williams, they came into USC, that was not a great offense. So I think I wasn't as concerned about Drake London, and I think that was that I think that was in extra skill that he had on top of some of the things. And I think we're still seeing him get open in Atlanta, and he just, again, bad quarterback play has not worked. Coleman, it's not the same thing. I think he kind of is one of those guys who is not naturally getting open. So the contested catch part is the feature of his game, which is tough. But he's one of these guys where I think if you kind of took him and made him like a power slot, the kind of guy where you kind of line him up inside, you can work him on slants and kind of use that big body to get him up, because he can run after the catch for like as big as he is. He does have that skill. So I think there is a way that Keon Coleman does work in the NFL, and you can kind of like manufacture some of those shorter passes and get him inside, use his body to kind of, post up on things that are going to, keep his momentum going down the field, not necessarily have, those jump balls down the sideline. The thing is with the Ravens, I don't know how much you want to be plugging up the middle of the field when you already have, the tight ends. Your tight end is basically your main slot receiver on a lot of plays anyway. So if his ideal position is kind of something the Ravens already have a little bit, I'm not totally sure what the fit is. But again, like, yeah, he is a guy that he does have that big body. He does have some traits that just kind of flash. It's just one of those things that it isn't as consistent as you might like to see for a team that's probably, really going to need someone on the outside who can, consistently get that separation. Still not sure if Coleman is going to be that guy.
Dan, let's get you out of here on this. Is there someone that you have just really taken a liking to as a day two, whether it's the second round, third round prospect that you think, might be available in that late 50, early 60 range, someone who the Ravens could look into? I mean, it seems like we're kind of at that point in the draft where everyone's starting to fall in love with Xavier Legette. I know it's just a small sample size. I know he's kind of had a long run up to production, but like, is he a guy worth kind of taking a flyer on at that X position? Is someone like Ricky Pearsall out of Florida maybe the heir apparent for that wide receiver 2 spot, assuming that Rashad Bateman is entering his last year in Baltimore? I mean, is there someone that you really like who is maybe probably not going to be available in the 40s or 50s, but could be had by the Ravens at number 64?
Yeah, I mean, Legette is a guy who stands out a lot with these numbers that I put together. He comes out number 1 in this class of like what he added to that South Carolina offense, and there was not a lot going on outside of him. And there were, some manufactured touches that he had to take. There were a lot of screens and things, but, he is a bigger body, but like 220 and runs real fast and, has that ability to get open in that, deep area, in that intermediate area. He's a guy, again, his, the cons on him is that he was the 5th year breakout, which a lot of people don't like, but the breakout happened, and I think that's very cool to see, especially when like he was a guy who did not have a lot of experience at wide receiver. I think he was asked to play quarterback like his senior year of high school, so there was a bunch of things that kind of hampered his development a little bit when he kind of came into college to play receiver. But to watch some of the things that he was able to do last year, it comes out really well. He's a guy I like a lot. Malik Washington of Virginia is another guy I really like and have kind of fallen in love with. I don't want to say like Steve Smith is, especially, Ravens fans know.
Got to be careful with the name. Yeah.
Yeah. He's great, but like he plays in that way. And, talking to him a little bit at the combine for, some of those media pressers, and he was like, I watch Steve Smith a lot. And, he's a shorter guy. He's like 5'8". He might have to, play the slot only, but he's a guy I think he can play the outside. He is a physical guy for his size. You can kind of see this Steve Smith influence in his game. I'll say that because you're not going to comp anyone to Steve Smith, but you can see that he is a guy who has studied Steve Smith like at that size too. So he's a guy, again, there was some not a good passing offense in Virginia. So he was a guy who kind of took advantage of just kind of, he was the only thing. If he wasn't taking a ball, down the field, and he can do that in many different ways and get open. He's exciting to watch. So I don't know if they, want to go with another small guy for Baltimore when you kind of already have Zay Flowers. It's kind of taken a size element out of the receiving core. But he's one of, he's a really fun guy. There's guys like, Javon Baker, Jermaine Burton, pretty, good deep threats who come out well. And Jalen Coker from Holy Cross, he's an FCS guy, but he completely dominated when he was playing in FCS. So he's a guy that, kind of tested pretty well, like fairly athletic. He's not like a Christian Watson athletic when he came out of FCS a couple years ago, but he's a guy who I think when you kind of look at what his profile is, it's based on route running, and he's a guy who is able to get open. So like he's a guy, I'm not sure how highly he's going to get drafted, but he's someone who I wouldn't be surprised if the Ravens have some interest in, is kind of that undervalued, the FCS guy who just kind of, gets open. He has a trait that translates. So I think like he could be another person, probably day 3 on this point, but he could be a fun player to watch also.
And if the Ravens draft him, we can try to get Bill Simmons on the pod to talk about what he saw from watching Holy Cross football. So
yeah, I mean, probably the only person who like really watched him before the draft process started.
That'd be awesome.
Dan, appreciate you being on with us. As always, check out your stuff on the 33rd team, pumping out great stuff, not just on the draft, but on all the happenings of free agency. I believe you had a Stephon Diggs article go up a couple days ago. Maybe the calculus on that has changed since we now know it's a 1-year deal where they basically gave him a raise and told him to probably get out after this 1 year in Houston, which is very much in keeping track with Stephon Diggs' career, unfortunately. But Dan, it was great talking to you. Hope this next 3 weeks, I guess, flyby for you, and
less
I
than
hope
now.
you figure out what day of the week it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you guys having me on. Really.
All right, Jonas. Now that you have heard from Dan Pizzuta, now that we have gone through all of these prospects, I'm asking you to stake your claim to one guy that you think would make sense for the Ravens. You can't include the guys at the top of the draft like Malik Neighbors or Marvin Harrison, but give me one guy you think you want to plant your flag on for the Ravens.
It's got to be Jalen Coker, right?
Really? In what round? Second round? Third round?
Who was the awful Patriots pick, like the just completely random day 2, day 3 offensive lineman that they took in the first round? That was just completely emblematic of the Village. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and N'Keal Harry.
I like
N'Keal Harry to getting taken in the first round was also bad.
Yeah, Baltimore zone, unfortunately. I like Ladd. I like Ladd. I think, he does so many things so well, and just has that familiarity and that comfort with Todd Monken. You go back I watched so much tape of that 2022 Georgia offense, and he was virtually unguardable on dig routes and just in breaking stuff over the middle. Obviously, that offense had a lot of stuff going for it. Brock Bowers is going to be a top 10 pick, we think. The blocking up and down that line was just tremendous. Stetson Bennett was a overly qualified 6th-year college quarterback, but I just really like what Ladd can bring. And people look at him and they see his name, they think there's no way that guy's a premium athlete. But I think the 4.39 40 and the footwork that he has on his routes shows that he could be a number 1 wide receiver if he's given the support and maybe some of the time to develop.
This goes against completely what Dan Pizzuta said, but I'm going to plant my flag on Keon Coleman. I have such a hard time watching him make these incredible highlight reel catches and thinking he's not going to make it. Now, he may never get the separation he needs to. I just want to see a guy above the rim who can go up and get it, who's 6'4", play with Lamar Jackson. And I want to see what he does to this offense. I could be totally wrong, and this could be blow up in my face. But I think if there's one guy value-wise at number 30 that I would like for the Ravens to take, it would be him. However, I think we both are in agreement that if all things are equal and guys are equal on their big board when it comes to number 30, the Ravens are going to opt for an offensive lineman over a wide receiver just because of how needy they are at that position. But there are other positions they could take, and we'll have plenty more on the Banner Ravens podcast to preview in the coming weeks because it is less than 3 weeks until draft day. Jonas, this has been a marathon episode with plenty of technical difficulties on my end, which I will blame on the earthquake, which happened earlier today. At Jonas_Shaffer is his Twitter handle. I am at Paul Mancano. Please like, rate, review, subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. And if you write us a good review, we will read it out here on the podcast. I'm giving you free reign to say whatever you want and giving you now a platform that is my voice to spread it. So I probably shouldn't make that kind of promise to people, but that's what I'm doing, Jonas. And subscribe to the Baltimore Banner, $1 for 6 months to read all of Jonas's great stuff. Thanks so much for tuning in. For Jonas Shaffer, I'm Paul Mancano. We'll catch you next time.